out 2 weeks ago and then not streaming last week. So we're back here streaming on this collection of essays or articles from Garet Garrett that particularly have to do with American foreign policy. Uh, this week we shouldn't be crashing out since my Wi-Fi router is now plugged into a more reliable power source. And I'm joined again by Ryan Turnipseed. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing?
It's getting cold, which is nice because it's been really warm. How are you, Mr. Quinn? Is it cold by you?
It is suitably chilly in this Chicago winter, and it has kept the protesting down to a minimum.
Finally, some winter. It's been very warm here. It's irritating. I like the snow, and there's no snow on the ground still because it all melted. Dang. But in any case, yeah, I don't have a segue. Let's get back into Garet Garrett. So when we crashed out, we were reading an article titled But Let That Dream Return, written on June 14th, 1941. Actually, let me just address a super chat we lost before we move on, because we do save our super chat. So if I recall, we had one from Dawn Browning giving us the usual, I think it was like $10. And we had a salute from someone. I can't remember who it was, but you know who you are. And then there was actually a third one for $5 from Mr. Charlie. And he asked, is it America first to call Southerners inbred stupid hillbillies, etc., and bash rural people, working class and Protestants constantly, as you glaze brown guys like Andrew Tate Sneeko, and his hero Kanye, like Nick Fuentes does? He's a cancer. Well, that's certainly an opinion. And yes, it's not America first to do that. So I advise not doing it. Anyone else have anything to say before we get into the article?
Yeah, it's the phrase "America first," and you're seeing this by multiple groups. Has changed meaning over time. So no, if you showed any of that to any of the America firsters that we're reading from, they would be abhorred.
I have visions of Ryan trying to explain Andrew Tate to Charles Lindbergh.
It would probably go just about as well as you're imagining.
Oy. Okay. Well, I think Mr. Quinn, you were reading the article. Would you like to go back to the beginning and read this important article for us?
Absolutely. This is But Let That Dream Return. This was written June 14, 1941. You'll have to bear with us if you watched 2 weeks ago, as I'm going to be covering the first page, which we read last time, but Mr. Garrett's words bear repeating. So, there are many, like the young man who writes a piece in a magazine saying, in effect, "We dreamed the dream of Soviet democracy and it failed us. But where is another? Give us a dream." And then the elders who take up such a thing in a spirit of self-reproach, saying, "This is the voice of our youth. Our democracy has failed also in this, to provide a dream." In the cloisters of learning, rare minds are revolving the curious thought that in a world of clashing ideologies, American democracy has no ideology to call its own, and it concerns them now to invent one before it is too late. Speak Up for Democracy by Edward L. Bernays. Where are we familiar with that name? That strikes a familiar chord. Edward L. Bernays. A book addressed to all lovers and defenders is a manual on how to sell it, how to write and speak for it, how to meet its enemies in debate and overcome them, how to use the telegraph and the telephone, buttons, stickers, all the arts of propaganda and publicity to sell it well. He believes this he believes is very important for the national morale. Dr. Hutchins, president of the University of Chicago, asks, "Is democracy a good form of government? Is it worth dying for? Is the United States a democracy?" "It is a democracy, and it is worth dying for," he says, "because it is the only form of government that can combine three characteristics, namely law, equality, and justice, whereas a totalitarian state has none of these and hence is the worst of all possible states. But there is Dorothy Thompson on being crowned for valiancy by Winston Churchill saying, "The democracy we should be willing to fight and die for must be one of a new order. At least we go to war for democracy. In the whole world, we must be at the same time thinking up a way to make it work better, especially here, because the democracies are endangered, not only because they have not got enough guns, but because they have been bracing themselves against all yearnings of all human beings to achieve what they have not achieved and to be what they are not. This must be democracy in the abstract, a thing in itself, outside of people. Are democracies that resist the yearnings of human beings democracies? Or do people resist it themselves? It may be, of course, that the trouble with democracy is people. We agree with Dr. Hutchins that what he calls the three characteristics of democracy are worth fighting for, but that is his democracy. There is in his school no student of history who does not know that something calling itself democracy may possess none of these characteristics, but in place of them the one characteristic of tyranny. That, of course, would not be what either we or Dr. Hutchins would call democracy. It would be what someone else had called democracy. Such words as freedom, justice, and equality have souls. And it is only for words with souls that men are willing to fight and die. If the word democracy has a soul left, it dies of its own too much. It is an omnibus word, an unregulated common carrier, a common depot for political and social ideas, meaning so many different things to so many different people that it means precisely nothing.
Yes, that's what we call a floating signifier.
Yes, it is what Garet is describing here is that democracy has been watered down to mean good thing. Tyranny has been watered down to mean bad thing. Neither of these have any actual informational content. They are slogans.
Right, and it's also worth pointing out that words with souls is a very cool concept that anyone listening should be cognizant of. What words with souls are you being dragged around to believe in, fight for, whatnot else? It's a very wise paragraph that we just read.
One could say certain words become flesh. Therefore, whether the United States is a democracy or not, we do not know, speaking for ourselves alone. It was once a republic, that we do know. We have thought the difference was important. To elucidate it, we have written many small essays on the science of government and on the age-old and still unresolved problem of how to reconcile government with liberty. The natural tendency being, as Jefferson said, for government to gain and people to give way, for government to extend its authority and for the people to surrender to it their responsibilities and liberties. Yet now, as we face the question that Dr. Hutchins asked, we discover that those differences in values we could be so dogmatic about, even perhaps right about, begin to recede. What are we willing to fight and die for? Certainly, for no such thing as form of government. There are many forms and none is fixed. There may be good government under bad forms and bad government under good forms. Anyhow, we can change them. But there was a dream, and when it comes back to us, all else will seem unreal. Democracy was not the dream. Neither was a scientific Republican form of government the dream. Ideas of equal freedom, equal justice, equal opportunity, they did inhabit it. They were implicit in it. Yet these were very old ideas, and the dream was new. What was it? The dream itself was America. Well, you cannot define America either, but that is no difficulty, because you either know what it is or you don't. It is everything good and bad, ugly and beautiful, sublime and absurd, rude and gracious, and all belonging. It is a scrap of paper enshrined in the Congressional Library, a cracked bell at Molly Pitcher's well, marked by a board in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, Valley Forge, and what our forefathers were fighting for then, which was not a democracy, not a republic, nor any form of government, but the right to set up whatever kind of government they liked and govern themselves. It is 187 died for it is what 187 died for in the Alamo. And if you had asked one of them then what it was, he would have said, "Why, hell, can't you see? This is Texas." It is Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia. And then, as you face away, it is the triumph of the gold standard over free silver. It is what the triumph of the gold standard over free silver did to commercial architecture in Chestnut Street. It is a June morning in Concord. It is the Capitol at night with floodlights on it, the flag at Gettysburg, the second inaugural dress, a battleship on the sea. It is Harvard University and Tuskegee. It is Baltimore, the Shenandoah Valley, the smell of ham frying in the hill cabins of Tennessee, and then such democratic happening in nature a little above St. Louis as when the muddy, turbulent Missouri River makes His Majesty the Mississippi move over. It is Bernays' truck driver saying, "I don't have to vote if I don't want to. It's a free country." It is Westbrook Pegler and Harold Ikes and the old Iron Pants, who was Blue Eagle dictator, now mending his idols and breaking them again. It is the Roosevelt clan with its passion to govern, and Fred Perkins of New York, who would sooner see the government seize his little battery business and sell it on the auction block than pay a Social Security tax he doesn't believe in. It is Frank Hague's political machine and Kelly's Chicago. It is Miami Beach and Hollywood and Sea Caucus, the pig town on the Hackensack Meadows. It is the skyline of New York against the dawn. It is the way the sun sets 3,000 miles west in Montgomery Bay. It is Wall Street and Snake Alley. It is John L. Lewis and Tom Girdler. It is the Erie Railroad, the Dust Bowl, the Corn Belt, and Kansas when it is a sea of billowing gold. It is the ballad of a magnificent city leveled by the earthquake and fire, singing, "The damnedest find ruins," while sitting on them, and now in the mirage-like beauty of San Francisco as it comes suddenly into view from the Golden Gate Bridge. On the east, it is a rock, and on the west, a sea lion. And the Hastings sun is 3 hours going between them. Glacial streams in the north, and on the south, the Everglades, palm trees, and subtropical waters. It is that perfect segment of Earth's surface that have long been reserved. Here we made a new and unlike world, our own entirely. Here people were free as people had never been free before. And although the design of it was borrowed by others, nowhere else did it work like this. Here the standards of common living, of material well-being, of comfort and creature enjoyment were raised to levels never before attained by human exertion in the history of the human race. We became very rich. But although the rich were richer, the poor were less poor than in any competitive country. Come judgment or revolution, where would you sooner be? Where, for all its faults, was a better order? Where is there a people who would not exchange their order for this one? There is no end to this dream that is America. None that we yet know. It can go on and on. Then what happened to it? Why does the young man say, "Give us a dream"? We can think of several reasons. So can Dr. Hutchins and Dr. Conant of Harvard, who has spoken of the creeping paralysis of disaffection in youth. But the principal reason, we believe, is that the youth of our generation has had the misfortune to be born at a bad time, with not enough of anything that could be taken for granted, and yet too little of anything really to fight for. It has been taught to be skeptical, dialectic, and critical of what it found. Now democracy is being sold to it, but the dream has not been imparted. Who will do that? Give it the dream, and it will be ready enough to fight and die, not for any political ideology, but for America.
That's a very beautiful article, and I think it touches on quite a few things that we should highlight now that we've heard the whole thing.
Indeed, it would have been a tragedy to break the the flow of the rhetoric there. That was let the pay into America.
Right. So if you want to know what is America and thereby what is an American, you have a lot of methods or ways to answer it that he provides here. Different things that he describes. How part of defining something isn't just giving a purely dictionary definition, but to describe it, and that's what he does here. And you can see that Garet Garrett mentions the land, the people, specifically the people fighting for the land and their own against others, what those people have built, including the buildings, any of the nature reserves or what have you else, the industry, and the, not specifically the form of government being the main thing, but also the form of government that was made and that could be changed. It's a very interesting way of describing America and who the people are in it.
Indeed, it is simultaneously strong and weak. It is strong in that it perfectly encapsulates all the things which escape easy definition, but weak in that it doesn't actually provide a definition. It provides a series of examples. It is a definition of America by illustration rather than by programmatic prescription.
Right, and to his defense, he kind of says that you either know it or you don't, which is another way to define or describe something.
I think 10 years or so before the formula was much more famously applied to another phenomenon.
Yeah, right. So this is I think this is definitely a major thing to have ready, anyone listening in. This is the definition of what an American is, and you can see by the examples given, besides the fact you either know it or you don't, which is why so many people balk at the idea of describing or defining what an American is. In all the examples, it's either the people, the place, or what the people in the place built. And pretty explicitly, you can't remove one of those things and have the same thing.
No, indeed. They are all part of the dream.
Yes, this part I hear that I have on screen is excellent, and it really encapsulates what we're actually about in the Old Glory Club. You just know what America is, you know what American heritage is, or you don't. And if you don't, you're not a heritage American. And that's really all there is to it. It's not, it's not merely this list of things he gives either, of course. These are sort of what people may look to depending on the person. But it's not like these are definitions of what America is. He's not saying the America is the Constitution or the Liberty Bell or Valley Forge or whatever. It's that, but it's also infinitely more than that.
It's interesting, just to test this a little bit. This, of course, is a description of what one would know or not know to be America circa 1941. It's a different description than would have been given in 1841, and no doubt it's a different description than is given today. How much play is there in this dream of America to change over time, do you think? I
don't know that it's all that different, actually, if you were to go backwards. Certainly, it might be forwards, but that's I think we'll get to that by the end of the stream, what happens as time goes on. But if you go backwards, it's just going to be that some of the names change as to who is doing the governing. There have been political revolutions that we have endured. So the people doing the governing changes. You wouldn't talk about the Roosevelt clan hankering to govern. But you would have a lot of the similar ideas. We have specific political arrangements in towns where people govern. You have people scattered across the country that have somewhat differing cultures, but are still out in the frontier trying to build the civilization. I think it can stretch backwards much easier, but I'm sure, as anyone knows just by looking out the window, if you try to extend this forward, you're going to encounter some problems because things have changed.
Indeed. Though on a sunnier note, maybe in 100 years, this litany will include the glittering glaciers of Greenland.
uh, yeah, I look forward to vacationing there. Yiz actually super chats $2 that she mentioned she had some fried ham for lunch today in Tennessee, which I have on the screen. Which is
Yes, you are an American.
yeah, there's no doubt about that. Funnily enough, I was watching. I watched The Silence of the Lambs for the first time. Well, not for the first time. Our president was watching it for the first time, and I was watching it with him. And I realized that Agent Starling's West Virginia accent is like exactly the way Yiz speaks, which really speaks to how well, what was it, Jodie Foster did that accent, because it was really spot on.
An actress good enough to slay a president to impress.
Indeed.
Something else about this article. Did you notice that none of the platitudes that we get now at all are mentioned in this by Garet Garrett? We don't get that America is business or innovation or something like that. We have specifically named businesses that were made by Americans that were sort of mainstays at the time. But we don't get these abstract ideas or ideals from Garet Garrett that America is innovation, progress, entrepreneurship, or anything else. Things that most people would likely associate with America, yet he makes it more specific, more concrete than the abstract ideal that is perhaps not exactly what it is, not exactly what an American is.
Indeed. It's also interesting that the one abstraction he does incorporate is liberty, but then he leaves it out of the description. He prefaces with the statement that we enshrine this government. We wanted to form any kind of government we pleased and govern ourselves with liberty, but then those abstractions drop by the wayside when he moves into the litany of the dream of America.
Right, and that's something that I find interesting. It's that's something that is out of a lot of political rhetoric in the modern day. It's all abstraction. There's no particular concrete brand or company that people can point to with some sort of a happy feeling that this is American.
Well, because there can't be. I mean, any move from the universal to the particular refutes the redefined conception of our democracy and of our diverse America.
Right.
Yeah, it is a good point that there's nothing abstract here. Everything brought up is something concrete, a concrete place, person, time, event. There are some things in here, and apparently I'm successfully getting it to scroll on screen now. But the only thing in here I didn't really understand is the triumph of the gold standard over free silver in relation to what it did to the architecture in Chestnut Street. Does anyone have any idea what he means by that?
I mean, I can only speculate that Chestnut Street is some banking center where large banks went up in the aftermath of that particular monetary fur fight, but I don't know.
Miami Beach mentioned. Oh, imagine what Miami Beach must have been like back then. Oh, yeah, I'm really vibing with this essay. Sorry. All right, what do we have next?
Next, false fear theme, which was September 6th, 1941. But before we move on, I just wanted to mention that finally, 24 episodes in, we have told you what an American is.
Yeah. Well, we've said what America is.
Well, I don't know that there's going to be absolutely much difference abstracting it down to American, but if something closer, we have something more concrete. But
which is the point.
Yeah, right. The next one we have the false fear theme, September 6th, 1941. Yeah, I don't think that there's any more context provided by this, but this is going to be interesting. Garet Garrett writes, "If Hitler wins, I tell the American people solemnly that the United States will never survive as a happy and fertile oasis of liberty surrounded by a cruel desert of dictatorship. These were the president's words on Independence Day. If Hitler wins, Our standard of living and our concept of human life will be placed in jeopardy, says Colonel William J. Donovan, who was sent
Just
to
a
Europe
note there, William J. Donovan was the founding father of the CIA.
who was sent to Europe to see with his own eyes what would happen, and now is editor-in-chief of Government Information. It's a good promotion. If Hitler wins, that will be the end of the American way of life, says Mr. Wilkie, the GOP nominee for president. American agriculture will be ruined. American labor will be enslaved. American freedom will become a memory. If Hitler wins, we shall face a Frankenstein monster in a Nazi helmet, with unseeing white holes for eyes, 1 foot in the burning ruins of Soviet Russia, and the other already in Alaska. In his right hand is a flaming torch, and his left arm is a mortuary tub filled with a skull named Dakar, and attached to the tub is a tag reading, "Threats to America." Dakar is a mean little seaport on the west coast of Africa, opposite the Great Bulge of Brazil. You are supposed to know that when Hitler has conquered Asia, he is going to build a railroad across Africa to Dakar in order to be able to jump from there to the swamps of Brazil.
Mhm.
By that time, he will have course moved across Siberia to the Bering Sea, almost within sight of Alaska. Then he will have the American way of life within his pincers where he wants it. One jaw of the pincer bearing down from the Arctic Circle, the other up from the equator.
Well, that's why we need Greenland.
Yep.
Hitler's still a threat, haven't you heard?
This is from the Shoot First, Shoot Now poster of the Fight for Freedom Committee. Senator Charles Glass, or Carter Glass, honorary chairman, the Right Reverend Dr. Hobson, chairman, Mrs. Calvin Coolidge and Mrs. Dwight Davis, vice chairman. If Hitler wins, our gold will be worthless. If Hitler wins, we cannot sell our wheat and cotton. If Hitler wins, we shall be unable to trade anywhere in the world but on terms dictated in Berlin. What a theme for America. We can imagine Hitler on a dull evening when his ego is low, calling to his propaganda minister saying, "Bring me the file on the American fear. I need some new ideas."
Mhm.
There are 2 war themes. The Crusader theme. America goes forth to destroy the aggressor, liberate the world, and establish a millennium of the 4 freedoms, produces its effects principally in the higher brackets of emotion. The Crusader finds that he must reach also the lower brackets. He consults the book of propaganda, and it tells him that it is not enough for people to hate what they are going to destroy. They must be made to fear it, too. So the Crusaders, who of course are fearless, believing that people for their own good must be made afraid, become themselves the fear-bringers. When emotion in the lower brackets does not respond as they expect it to do, they return to the book. It tells them to not be discouraged. If they go on saying it over and over, people will begin to believe it, but they must lay it on, which they do. Nevertheless, they have their bad moments near to despair, when they must be heard saying, "We call fate to be our witness. We have cast the truth upon them. What is wrong with people that they do not believe it?" But do they believe it themselves? On this great segment of the most favored continent, called now an oasis, are 130 million Americans, possessing fabulous natural resources, a body of science, and technology inferior to none, and the paramount machine power of the world. Who might be going to surround this oasis in a fatal manner? Who might be going to enslave these 130 million Americans? Does anyone really believe that 90 million Germans are going to do that, whether Hitler wins or not? If these 130 million Americans cannot keep their own world and keep it as if they want it, or keep it as they want it, if they cannot trade with whom they will and on terms they like, if they cannot survive as a free people against 90 million Germans, then the American way of life is what Hitler thinks it is, and not what we have thought it was. This fear theme, we say, is false and contemptible. And if it were possible for Hitler to win, it would be a grave moral and psychic liability. For suppose people had believed it, and then after all, Hitler should win. Happily for the outcome, people have not believed it. They have in fact resisted it, not from lethargy or indifference, but by a reaction of good American common sense. If they had to choose, they would prefer, we think, the Crusader theme, For however romantic and unreal that may be, ignoble it is not. What they would greatly prefer, however, is no theme at all, intended to manipulate their emotions, but a statement of simple integrity concerning what we are going to do and why we are going to do it. We are not fighting Nazism for fear it will devour us, not really. We are not fighting it because we have to choose between dying on our feet or living on our knees. We are going to destroy it because it is intolerable. We could live in the same world with it, we could compete with it and beat it on any field, even the economic field, but we don't want that kind of world, and we possess the power to prevent its coming to pass. We are resolved to destroy it because it is cheaper now to do that, no matter what the immediate cost may be, than to live with it. And why is it intolerable? Not for any way of life it may evolve, nor for its political and social ideologies, but because it prefers and glorifies the solutions of force. An event of incomparable meaning is taking place. The stupendous American omen is beginning to assume a certain form. We did not ourselves foresee it, nor could it have been foretold. We may still be unable to define it clearly, and yet we already know what it is. Never before in the long story of the human race has it happened that the ultimate power of war lay in the hands of people who morally and temperamentally abhor war and would willingly renounce it as an instrument of national policy. Germany, representing the extreme opposite principle, is under a declining sign, and what a just and terrible design now begins to appear. The one kind of warfare it was certain suicide for Germany to release in the world was mechanized warfare, the war of technology and machines. That was bound to call forth American power in the aspect of its most formidable supremacy. We are the machine people. America is Machine Street. The only thing that could possibly defeat us is fear. So this is not included on the stream because we just really like to bash Germany of the mid-century or anything like that. Nor could you really publish anything to the contrary when this was published. But it's worth mentioning that war propaganda, especially on the American people, always has the two elements, the fear and the crusader. And beyond that, the American people always like the crusader theme because they do like to think of themselves as doing good.
Indeed, yeah. It's the high-low emotional appeal. And very truly did he say they lay it on. Because that is certainly one of the most disillusioning things about human nature in the 21st century is that you repeat often enough, people believe it.
That's true. And the other thing that I find interesting is that the two types of propaganda just directly contradict. Hitler is going to destroy us all. Also, we're invincible, and we're going to go liberate the entire world single-handedly. This is the same thing that we get exposed to today.
It is. The difference being that it was perhaps more true back then. This is a very interesting picture of a moment of time in America where we were the machine people and America was the machine street. In the current day, we struggle to manufacture anything. But at the height of the the climax, really, of the Industrial Revolution in 1930s, 1940s America, we saw ourselves as, first and foremost, an industrial people. And it's amazing how that's changed.
And this is something that Garet Garrett talks about throughout the other articles. He takes a very familiar line of logic to anyone that remembers anti-welfare state polemics from maybe a decade ago, where he is lambasting the Americans under the New Deal for trying to consume everything they had because it was weakening them. Mm-hmm. I remember, I think Molyneux might have been a big person to talk about that in the modern day. You have neutral countries that had the greatest wealth in the world and decide to consume it with welfare states. Well, here Garet Garrett is making the same argument, and I think we read out one of those arguments last week.
Yes.
That we decide to consume our strength. In other writings by Garet Garrett, he would also make the argument that not only did we decide to consume it, we also decided to expend it in this war. It was a very costly war with a lot of material used, and we maintained our war state for the entire time afterwards. So it's worth saying that even though the Crusader theme is perhaps more not benign, but more positive and light, something that Americans would like to think of themselves, it still has costs. It will still cost them.
Whether true or not, it is not ignoble, as Mr. Garrett says.
Right. And so this is I selected this one particularly because we're getting both of these with at full bore right now. If we do not currently act as aggressively as possible on the national stage, says many people, we're going to be encircled by China, Russia, and other countries aligned with them. But also, if you say that we should not be doing that, you're claiming that we are somehow weak, and that is intolerable. So on the one hand, we're about to be encircled by the rest of the world and completely overwhelmed if we don't have this last-ditch attempt that's really is common sense if you think about it, says the people justifying it. But also, if you say that we shouldn't be doing it, or say that we don't have the ability to, or whatnot else, then you're claiming that America is weak and on its knees, and that's intolerable and unpatriotic.
Indeed. And the map game autists in the audience will already know this, but for the rest of the audience, Charlie, how feasible is the invasion of Brazil from Dakar and up to the United States at this time?
Well, yeah, I mean, we even have an example of what happened. We know what happened in Africa, right? So that's.
Could you imagine moving an entire army through Alaska?
Yeah, I mean, anyone who's ever been in that sort of terrain knows how unbelievably difficult it is to move through the mountains. And it's not like we had the interstate highway system at that time. I mean, yeah, he's kind of intentionally being a bit not obtuse, but exaggerating, hyperbolic is the word I'm looking for. Although maybe this sort of thing was like said verbatim for all.
No, he's describing a poster that he saw.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, there's no reason to even think about this as remotely serious. I mean, during the war, there were a few U-boats that made it to the Atlantic coast, and they basically did nothing but harass shipping for a little while and then leave. We do have a big problem with this right now, this type of propaganda. I think it's pretty useful that a few weeks have passed since the incidents in Venezuela, because as is the case with many Trump foreign policy decisions, it's a fairly minor event. The event was treated very much as this thing upon which the fate of America hinged. In retrospect, only a few weeks later, as is usually the case, be it missile strikes on Iran or whatever, or this, or even the future idea of purchasing Greenland, these all end up being fairly minor footnotes in the even just the Trump presidency, let alone American history. I mean, think what you want about purchasing Greenland, but it's not like it's going to have some massive influence or effect on the future of this country. It's just not, nor did the strike in Venezuela. This is it rightly ought to be perceived as a sort of minor foreign policy event. I mean, exactly as it would have been treated in any other time and place. We're talking like Napoleon installs like Marshal Murat as like governor of Naples or whatever.
It is worth pointing out, since we covered this on previous streams, though, that these minor interventions will add up. If we're going to play the part of an empire, it is going to weaken us. If we go back to what we talked about last week, if we just keep consuming everything that we've stored up and produced, we're going to pay the cost. So even if it is minor, it does not bode well, I think.
Yeah, it's illustrated in this very article. We are no longer the machine street. That's China now. So, yeah, it has cost us.
Well, certainly what doesn't bode well is sort of, eating up the propaganda about it. That's definitely extremely not just low utility, but it's actively detrimental. And of course, this show is meant primarily for our club. So definitely, whatever people's opinions are on these things, one should not be sort of gleefully consuming the propaganda lines, sort of as laid out by Mr. Garet Garrett here, because it is the exact same propaganda today.
And on that point as well, because I think a lot of people find propaganda online and then spread it thinking that they are the propagandist, but there's in that equation there's only one propagandist, and it's whoever made the propaganda to begin with. It's not you for picking it up and spreading it. That's playing the part of being affected by the propaganda. I think that might get lost in translation due to the ability to quote tweet, retweet, and whatever else so easily. People think themselves propagandists, but very little propaganda is actually produced.
Correct, yeah. All right, well, I suppose I will read the next one since it's been a little while since I have read. So we have here Government by Consent, written on September 20th, 1941. Quote, "The change that has taken place in the character of American government, a change within the form, may be studied in the behavior of the parliamentary principle, which was designed by the Constitution to be the creative lawmaking power. Observe it in action. Observe particularly that eccentric movement of congressional debate, as if it was revolving off center. The explanation of this bewildering phenomena is that the immediate matter of debate is not the axis upon which the debate turns. Always there is something else, something that is not there, and what that is, asserted on one side and denied on the other, can be neither proved nor disproved for the time being. For example, the ostensible subject may be a matter called A. The vote will be upon that. But what the debate really turns upon is whether A is simple or compound. Does it involve saying B later? And if so, why is B not there? It is as if the executive principle were spelling out a word. The consent of the parliamentary principle is necessary in order to preserve the form. The parliamentary principle is Congress, but Congress does not know what the word is. Only the executive principle knows that. If Congress knew, it might not consent. Therefore, what the executive principle does is submit one letter at a time. This was perfectly illustrated in the debate on the bill to extend the period of involuntary military service beyond the 1 year for which the draft army will be first called up. Granted that all the arguments advanced by the President as Commander-in-Chief and by his Chief of Staff for extending the period were valid, yet why had they not been foreseen when Congress was asked to consent to the original Draft Act in 1940? Why was it not told then that a term of 12 months was too short, that an army could not be trained in that time, and that to begin releasing the draftees serially at the end of their 1 year's service would be not only disruptive and wasteful, but, in the words of the President, a tragic error, and, in the words of the Chief of Staff, a fundamental and tragic error, bound to weaken the country's prestige abroad and thereby invite war? Why had none of this been foretold? Had the General Staff foreseen it and said nothing about it? The Senate Committee on Military Affairs sent for the Chief of Staff and asked him why, if he knew better, he had approved the 1-year draft in the first place. He reminded the committee that, in the first place, he had asked for a period of 18 months and continued, quote, "I said I would compromise on 15, but certainly we must have at least 12. I admit that it is a peculiar way to put it, but I was trying to get the Selective Service Act passed," end quote. The meaning of that naive admission is perfectly clear. The original Draft Act was, with it, the 1-year limitation was the letter A. Letter B, the extension, was bound to follow. The General Staff knew that. If the General Staff knew it, the President knew it. But they were afraid that A and B together would be too much. The Congress might not consent. So then the immediate matter of the debate was B. Ostensibly, it was B. This one question of extending the period of service, and on that there should be an aye and no. But what everyone was thinking of was C, which was not there. For an interesting reason, it was not there. It was visible for a moment, everybody saw it, and then it was suppressed, leaving B to stand alone. B and C arrived at the Capitol together, and were to have been presented together. B was the bill to extend the period of involuntary military service. C was a bill to repeal the provision of the original Draft Act, which said that the army thereby created should not be sent off this hemisphere. B meant an army extended in time. C meant an army to be free in space. one that the commander-in-chief could send anywhere in the world at his own discretion, with no further benefit of congressional opinion. What happened was that the reaction to C was instantly hostile, so hostile that it was immediately withdrawn. Why? Because it was evident that Congress would not consent to B and C together. In the debate, Senator Vandenberg referred to C, saying it was a sinister request. It was an ominous request. I fear it was a prophetic request. Yet C was not there to be either debated or voted upon. It had been withdrawn for the sake of obtaining consent to B alone. Whether C would follow B as B followed A, nobody knew. So the Congress voted upon B alone. We speak here not of the merits of A, B, or C. We speak of what is happening to government. You cannot say when it was the Congress you cannot say when it was that Congress ceased to determine public policy. It relinquished that prerogative little by little and unawares, until it had passed to the executive principle, to the president, that is. During the first phase of this change, the significance of it was obscured by the happy fact that the executive principle was not yet autocratic. It held fast to the tradition. It submitted its policies to Congress. That was collaboration, but it was not likely to continue forever. It discontinued suddenly with the advent of a president who had neither the reverence for tradition nor a fear of power. Since then, great matters of national policy, foreign policy especially, have been submitted to Congress never as a whole, but as parts of a rebus, as A by itself, B by itself, until the word was spelled out. And since then, every important act of Congress has been an act of consent, not an act of will. You may say, even so, that the power to give or withhold consent is the ultimate power. But this is a veto power, uncreative in itself, able to act only upon what is presented to it. Read Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution. Quote, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States, end quote. Imagine it to read, quote, such policies as the presidents may from time to time determine, and the laws that may be necessary to carry them into execution shall receive the consent of Congress of the United States, end quote. In a fine essay on democratic discipline, Dr. C.R. Mann says, in practicing self-discipline, an American citizen is generally confused by no less a pillar of democracy than the Declaration of Independence. Near the beginning it says, quote, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, end quote. This declaration was issued some 13 years before the Constitution, and few seem to have noticed the misleading implications of the phrase consent of the governed. Yet mere consent generally is a passive or negative action, not strictly comparable with the positive action called for by we the people ordain and establish this Constitution. Had the Declaration said governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers by delegation from the people, would not the two have been more compatible, since both would call for positive action by the people? The form survives, but now for the time we have government by consent of the people, not government by will of the people. For better or worse, that is the change. Well, I mean, one of the interesting things about this essay is the fact that it's also somewhat behind itself, because, as we know, during the period of time in which this was written, you, of course, would have. I mean, this was when the managerial revolution was being undertaken. So, while Garet Garrett,
it's the essence of that very revolution.
Yes. So while he's calling it a sort of revolution in executive power, basically usurping this legislative principle, in reality, it's a double usurpation. It's not merely an executive power. It's actually a managerial power, which has usurped the executive power, which has usurped the legislative power.
It's illustrative that he doesn't say Roosevelt said this and this to Congress. It's that this chief of staff and that chief of staff told Congress this and then that. It's functionaries going to Congress and feeding it the policy by nibbles.
Yeah, good point.
And what he's describing here is a typical tactic in a parliament, but I think it's worth pointing out as well that this tactic works and is still used to this day as like a main tactic to get things going. Larger plans in the future.
Just look at what happened after 9/11. I mean,
well, I mean, but it still goes on today. So
Yeah.
I actually do not mind like large resistance to seemingly minor policies in the present that seem like they're going the wrong direction, because as we can see, and as Garet Garrett is pointing out in this article, that's the way of the system. You have government by passive consent, of which what is being consented to, these policies, usually foreign policy, are rolled out piece by piece, slightly more radical than the last so that it's more acceptable, but also to where there's something looming over the distance to where you can say, all right, we can allow this next thing that's coming down the road, but not the one after that because that's way too far. It's a losing game. Not that you can play the game to win it, but this is kind of why this is why I don't mind the very seemingly disproportionate reactions whenever this stuff happens. It seems disproportionate, if you were to go back to Garrett's example, to throw a major fit at A, and A seems very common sense. We're calling up people to defend the country should it be attacked. As it actually happened in history, it was attacked, though that may have been invited and planned. But it would be very non-common sense to oppose it, very unpragmatic, perhaps ideological or driven by some sort of egomania. Yet by consenting to A, you eventually get B and C. What he describes as C, we eventually have had since the war has ended.
Sorry, I was muted. Just to tie this to a contemporary example directly, I mean, you have the ABCs being played out in our big beautiful bill, right? There was this big debate like last year whether or not this thing should be passed, and it's sort of one of those bills where it's like, pass it to find out what it does. And now we do have clearly one of the effects of the bill has been that it looks like it was successful in funding ICE, right, to the extent that it's able to do apparently large operations that it wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Fine enough. But I actually saw today, basically people saying that, well, like, this was justified, and yes, it had to have been passed, and you were wrong for opposing it. But well, we're not really there yet, are we? Because while this is good that these actions are being taken now, apparently made possible by this, there's so much more to be done, right? And I mean that in terms of like the force that ICE is physically applying in certain states where the police have not cooperated with the feds on immigration enforcement. That kind of force needs to be applied in a soft power way too, in terms of going after employers on a really large scale, not just like some here. Like, I want to see big stories about major corporations getting hit, not just in regards to like construction or something like that. But, we're talking like the classic H-1B debate, and that itself is sort of just a signifier in general for like immigration from India and whatnot. So the point I'm making here is like you're seeing this play out right now, and all of the actions are being like preemptively justified before the actual justification is hit yet, and it hasn't happened. It's like, I'm not saying the big beautiful bill could never be justified, but that still has not been borne out. Like, that has not been demonstrated yet. So to sort of preemptively fall into alignment with like the C, like you're basically reaching for the C to come in without knowing the full word. Does that make sense?
Yeah, or I mean, I was going in perhaps a somewhat more negative direction. You can keep the same context that the example is given in something like foreign policy. The operation in Venezuela was very minor, as you were saying. We are not currently rerunning Iraq, as many people were quick to point out. Yet afterwards, you had a whole bunch of people within the current governing coalition coming out to say that we kicked the Iraq syndrome, we're ready to move on. They're already talking about what they want to do next. So it would be, I think, a mistake to say that Trump's coalition has a B and a C after A, if you assume that the bill passed last year was an A, Rather, it's more correct to say that members of his coalition, people that wanted foreign direct action, do have a B and a C that they will pass afterwards. Who's actually introducing A, B, and C? It's I think it's pretty clear that it's other members of the coalition. So,
indeed, and to the extent that is generalized to the American people, it's again another case of consent rather than by the will of. After all, who on the day before Venezuela had been calling for the abduction of a president? I mean, it hit everyone out of left field, and everyone reacted, which is exactly the passive mode of being that Garrett denounces here.
Right, and of course, it would be one thing if 2 weeks ago people were cheering on what was going to happen next, as if like we had any idea. But we still have no idea what's going to happen in Venezuela. No one even knew what was going to happen with the government. Was who was going to be the next president. So it would be one thing to sort of say, yes, I support this because this is going to happen next, and then this and this and this, and that's the entire justification. But we don't have the ABCs in front of us, So again, it's really important, regardless of what one's opinions are on this stuff, not to just like fall in line with propaganda that, okay, well, this is good because some mystery I don't know about. We don't know what the ABCs are. Like you said, the coalition is planning that. People in his coalition, we have no idea what that is. So, I'm not gonna, and people shouldn't like adopt it as like their own thing when it manifestly isn't, because you have no idea what it is.
Mm-hmm.
The only other thing I had on this article was that this is a very good argument against the popular understanding of government by consent. People would usually think it's a very libertarian idea, but here you have Garet Garrett saying that it's perhaps the exact opposite. Government by consent is being stomped on by the administrative and managerial state. So,
well, yeah, because the option gets presented as do this or do nothing, basically.
Right. Yes. So
the old saw is power lies not in answering questions, but in asking them.
All right, and finally, we've got the mortification of history teed up in the appendix, actually. So, who wants to take this one?
Well, before we start, it's worth mentioning that this is after Garet Garrett was at the Saturday Evening Post. If I remember correctly, he was fired in 1942. This one appears in the Chicago Tribune, so I can read it, or...
I'll just point out it's also the first article we've read after America declared war. So this is, almost 2 years into America's involvement in World War II here.
Yeah, right. This is 1943. So would we be in Sicily at this point? Certainly, we were in Africa in 42. So yeah, American soldiers are dying overseas in Europe.
So this one's somewhat longer. I'll just keep going until I'll tag in probably Mr. Quinn, since he'd be next in line.
Let me know.
Alrighty. So this is the mortification of history. If you say, I am first of all an American, you have to be careful. It may be understood, or it may be misunderstood. You might have said, I am for America first, and the American who says that will be denounced in his own country and by his own government. That is not enough. We will be denounced also in Great Britain, Russia, and China, all accusing him of one thing. He is an isolationist. But what is that? An isolationist is one who is said to have sinned against the peace and well-being of the whole world. He is held responsible for the necessity now to mortify American history by rewriting it to be a theme of guilt and atonement. According to that theme, he is one who would crawl back into the shell America lived in for so long, a favorite figure, that of American crawling back. One who would have America put a Chinese wall around itself and cut the world off. One who thinks America can go on living all to itself, declining to cooperate with the rest of the world. One who, having believed this and having persuaded others to believe it with him, is now to blame for the fact that after winning the First World War, we lost the peace, and so brought the Second World War to pass. Or, One who, after the First World War, according to Mr. Wallace, belonged to the thing that came out of its cave and made certain that we would adopt international policies which would make World War II almost inevitable. The name of that cave-dwelling thing was isolationism. What nation, during 150 years, has done most to alter the ancient weights and measures in the world and the ways of thinking and living of all the people in it? What nation, during that time, has been the principal factor in world history? Do you ask? The answer is not what you think. The answer will be, that's just it. The more we did, the more we were not there. Nonsense may create a kind of reality. The Mad Hatter lives, although he never existed. So there might be an elephant that lived as a mole and suffered from megalomania. The story of a people who lived in a shell and changed the whole world is nonsense. Nevertheless, it creates an image that becomes in itself an important political fact. Isolationism, according to this story, was from the beginning and not a great sin at first because Isolationism, according to the story, was from the beginning and not a great sin at first because we received it as doctrine from the founders, especially from Washington, who pronounced it in the farewell address, and afterwards from Jefferson. Thus the distortion began. Neither Washington nor Jefferson was an isolationist, nor were any of the founders. They were Americans. They were Americans first. They were sick of the uproar and dissensions raised in the new American household by pro-European factions. First, the pro-French, always wanting the new republic to make war on England, and then the pro-British wanting it to fight France. Washington well knew the weakness of his countrymen for such foreign infatuations, and it filled his mind with foreboding. That is why he so earnestly exhorted them forever to avoid embroilment in the quarrels and intrigues of Europe. There had been already one entangling alliance, the first and the last until now. That was the alliance with France during our struggle for independence. And before we could buy ourselves off from that, it had almost got us into another war with England. Everybody knew at that time what Washington meant. Before 1776, the American colonists had been dragged through 4 European wars. On the frontiers, they knew the war whoop of Indians armed and incited alternately by France, Spain, and England, who in their struggle for control of the North American continent thought nothing of setting the red savage to kill white pioneers. Who could imagine there was such a thing as friendship among nations? Certainly this new republic in a new world was not only without a friend, even France having turned with against isolation. Yet,
Can you
that was
pause
the
for
first...
a second?
Yeah.
Are we still live? Just I got a quick little disconnect, reconnect message.
Oh no.
I mean, we're still on the internets, so
We appear to still be live.
okay, good.
Okay, cool. We're what would it be? Traumatized from 2 weeks ago. Well, while we're paused, I think it might be worth mentioning towards the beginning when we're talking about calling the isolationist an enemy of world peace. It has a very similar sound to Schmitt's what was it, Enemy of Humanity, or something similar. It's a very effective way to deem the isolationist as someone to be without any person whatsoever, someone to be dismembered because they are an enemy of the world.
Someone to be hated and feared.
Right.
All right, I lost my place. Where were we?
Freedom of the seas.
Okay, yeah,
sorry.
there we go.
So, I'll continue. Freedom of the seas could not have been the idea of a people thinking isolation. Yet that was the first article of American foreign policy. We were willing to fight for it and did fight for it more than once. The Yankee skipper was the first in seafaring history to keep its sails up all night. His fast clipper ships, with the best paid sailors and the highest freight rates, carried tea from Canton to Liverpool, beating the slow British ships in their own China trade. This was to prove the American maxim that time is money. The Mediterranean, then, was the private sea of the Barbary pirates, who dwelt on the north coast of Africa and levied tribute on merchant ships. America said to Europe, let's go together and abolish this nuisance. Europe declined, saying it was cheaper to pay tribute, and besides, it was an old world custom. So at last, the little American fleet did it alone. On this page of the old book, there is a curious footnote. Benjamin Franklin said, "I think it not improbable that these rovers may be privately encouraged by the English to fall upon us and to prevent our interference in the carrying trade. For I have in London heard it as a maxim among the merchants that if there was no Algiers, it would be worth England's while to build one."
Hmm.
A favorite distortion of the new theme makers is to say that during the first 100 years of its happy, isolated life, America went strutting around in a protective garment not of its own making, namely the Monroe Doctrine, which had been a British idea to begin with, and then calling itself American policy, owed its success entirely to the power of the British Navy. That is not so. After the downfall of Napoleon, the reactionary monarchs of the Old World set up what they called the Holy Alliance, and conceived the idea of saving Spanish America for Europe. This boded no good for England. In the year 1823, therefore, the British government proposed to the government of the United States a joint undertaking to defend the new Latin American republics against the Holy Alliance. President Monroe discussed the proposal with Jefferson and Madison, and the three of them inclined to it because the Holy Alliance, once established in Latin America, would be a perpetual menace to free government on this hemisphere. But John Quincy Adams, who was Secretary of State, said, "Only 10 years ago they contemptuously burned our capital. Now they are asking us to join them as an equal in a perilous enterprise. It is very flattering, but let us look to pitfalls." I'll stop there for a moment, so I can take a break and maybe pass it on. But hopefully, if anyone listened to the Monroe Doctrine episode, this should already be known amongst our audience. We very much
Indeed.
covered this. And not only did John Quincy Adams say that this was something that we shouldn't commit to, but so too did John Calhoun, the Secretary of War under Madison, say. And
Indeed.
he too said it was bad to make perpetual alliances like this.
And thus President Monroe's doctrine took a very different character.
And you'll also notice that part of Monroe's doctrine, just given this context, is not that no other country can have any influence in the Western Hemisphere. That would be against every part of Europe if he were to declare such a thing.
Indeed.
Yeah, it is really annoying to see the Monroe Doctrine invoked, even in relation to Greenland, which is closer than Venezuela in terms of aligning with the doctrine, but still doesn't, because Greenland was an existing colony. I don't know who had it, in the when Monroe established his doctrine, but because I think Denmark's acquisition of it was somewhat more recent than that. But
yeah, they acquired it from Norway.
Okay, I think in the 1950s or something. But either way, it was an existing colony, right? Which is not what the Monroe Doctrine is about. Now, that doesn't say well, you can't before this, but just it's very silly for people to basically destroy our own history by saying wrong things about what the Monroe Doctrine was. when you apply the Monroe Doctrine to things that literally are not the Monroe Doctrine, you're actually contributing to the destruction of our own history, right? So hopefully people will go back and watch our Monroe Doctrine stream, because that one was actually one of the more important ones we've done, simply because this part of our history is so ridiculously abused. And it's really irrelevant to whether or not you think the Operation Venezuela and the potential purchase of Greenland is legitimate or not. Regardless of what you think about it, it is absolutely not within the Monroe Doctrine. And that's not even to say that the U.S. has to follow the Monroe Doctrine, but if you're trying to claim it as the Monroe Doctrine to even buy Greenland, it's literally not, right? It's 100% absolutely verifiably not within the Monroe Doctrine to do either of those things.
No, the Greenland, if anything, would fall into the Jefferson Doctrine of purchase of vast quantities of land. But yes.
Yes, the first neocon, I hear, because apparently buying land makes you a neocon these days.
This may sound... Actually, no. I was going to say this might sound like a ivory tower thing to do, but I think this is a very basic standard that should be held for anyone. If you're going to invoke something like a proper noun that you can read over the course of maybe half an hour, you can literally Google Monroe Doctrine text and find Monroe's address to Congress and read it yourself to see what he said, you should read things before you invoke them.
Ryan, I think holding that standard opens you to bitter disappointment.
Unfortunately, I do hold the standard, and I have been bitterly disappointed. That's why I'm hoping that anyone listening to us or that may listen to it in the future will take this advice that was, I think, given to me by my great-grandmother when I was in the 2nd grade, 3rd grade. You don't talk about things that you don't know about. Sort of a very good piece of advice. Don't invoke things that you have not read. Do not invoke things that you don't know about. It's a very simple piece of advice. Do not say that something is the Monroe Doctrine because it happened in the Western Hemisphere. If you read it, you'll know that that's not the Monroe Doctrine. It's very simple.
Yeah, I mean, it's at least a standard that should be adopted within our club membership. Like, we can't, if we're a Heritage American club, we should absolutely not be literally destroying our own heritage by invoking parts of our history 100% incorrectly. Like, that should not be happening, right? And this is regardless of opinions, right? It doesn't matter, again, if you think that the operation of Venezuela is good, or that buying Greenland's good, or that it's bad. It's just that it's not within the Monroe Doctrine to do either of them at all.
The pitfalls were 3. 1, the United States would thereby become an ally of Great Britain against the Holy Alliance. 2, the door would be left open to British colonization on any scale. And 3, the United States would itself be bound not to acquire any Spanish-American territory. Although nobody had yet imagined it, we were going to want Texas and California for our own territorial completion. The founders were shrewd statesmen. The sequel was not what Great Britain expected or wanted. In his next message to Congress, President Monroe announced the doctrine that has ever since borne his name. It meant simply, America for Americans. Any attempt to extend the European system to this hemisphere would be regarded as an act unfriendly to the United States. The Americas, both North and South, were no longer open to colonization. That went for Russia, for everybody in the Holy Alliance, and for Great Britain too. Those who say that in any case the British Navy did stand between us and the Holy Alliance, and that the American fathers had the astuteness to count upon it without the grace to acknowledge it, cannot know what would have happened if then or afterward the Holy Alliance had moved against this hemisphere. We do know that the British Navy did not interfere when, during the Civil War, Napoleon III invaded Mexico and set up an emperor there who did nothing wrong, and that in 1895, in the Venezuelan boundary dispute, Great Britain herself was the European power to whom an American president was saying in a peremptory manner, hands off. Before the end of our great maritime chapter, while the clipper ship was queen of the sea, Commodore Perry, for better or worse, went knocking on the door of Japan with cannon. He had a message from the President of the United States saying, "Nobody can stay shut up like this, quite out of the world. Come forth and trade with the rest of us. It will make you rich and powerful."
Yeah, that worked out great.
What's that?
That worked out great.
Yeah, that definitely was not backfiring in 1943. Yeah. We lost our seafaring eminence during the Civil War. Just then, the iron steamship began to supersede the sailing ship, and although the first iron steamship to cross the Atlantic had been an American vessel out of Savannah, still, when the war was over and we looked again at the sea, what view was less exciting than the vision of the empire? That view was less exciting than the vision of an empire to the west. The way to San Francisco was no longer by Cape Horn, but by rail, which, back when we talked about the American frontier in history, this was kind of the phase change of the American character from being a seafaring people to a continental people. We were transfixed by the West and forged ourselves on the frontier rather than out on the sea. During the next 30 years, the foundations were laid for the tower that was to be the one impregnable citadel of freedom in the whole world. That was something the builders did not know. They worked as if time were measured and running out, and it was, but they did not know that either. The only motive they were conscious of was the illusion of profit. Then came the war with Spain over freedom for Cuba. And although Cuba was made free, the unintended sequel for us was a lurch toward imperialism when the flag went up in the Philippines. But even as this was under a promise of ultimate independence for the Filipinos, which we never drew back. Our next foreign adventure was to assist in putting down the fanatical Boxer uprising against all foreigners in China. Whereupon, facing Europe as a friend of Asia, we announced that America stood for the territorial integrity of China. Then Theodore Roosevelt, walking softly in the world with a big stick, tweaking the Kaiser's nose, stepping on the neck of a European warflame in Morocco, digging the Panama Canal with one hand, inserting the peace between Japan and Russia, rattling the Monroe Doctrine, building a navy only second to Great Britain. After him was Taft. By this time, the tower was rising very fast. It was visible from every corner of the world. As an industrial power and in the international exchange of wealth, called foreign trade, we had arrived first place, although never since the clipper ship had we possessed another great merchant marine. We had let that go. Our foreign trade was carried in foreign bottoms. Under Taft, there evolved the idea, a very naive idea, it may seem to us now, that our surplus of industrial products could be loaned away in the form of foreign investments under a policy designed to promote international well-being and to enable the backward peoples of the world to advance much faster. This was called dollar diplomacy, sneeringly, and Taft was its last prophet. But much more it will be remembered that he earnestly supported and afterward led the American Evangel for a League of Nations to keep and enforce the peace of the world. After Taft came Woodrow Wilson, then the slogan under which 2 million soldiers went to Europe, a war to end war. For all of this...
Wait, so pause for a moment. Could you imagine if we, for some reason, resurrected dollar diplomacy and thought that we could keep our power by loaning out all of our material and money to the less developed nations of the world to progress them to be in line with us? I don't know. It seems very naive, very unwell put together. It would be a very foolish thing to spend 80 years on, and who knows how many trillions of dollars.
Some sort of IMF fever dream. For all of this, those who now are writing the theme of guilt and atonement say that the spirit of isolationism was always there, latent or manifest. They say it was not until after the First World War, however, that it took possession of our acts. To say this, no one has agitated so much paper and ink as Mr. Wilkie. In One World, he writes, "If our withdrawal from world affairs after the last war was a contributing factor to the present war and to the economic instability of the last 20 years, and it seems plain that it was, a withdrawal from the problems and responsibilities of the world war after this war would be sheer disaster," the guilt theme stated. Then he says, after the First World War, we entered into an era of strictest detachment from world affairs. We shut ourselves away from world trade by excessive tariff barriers. We washed our hands of the continent of Europe and displayed no interest in its fate, while Germany rearmed. One may allow for the fact that Mr. Wilkie discovered geography by flying around the world and seeing with his own eyes that continents and oceans are plainly only parts of a whole, as seen as I have seen them. So he has discovered American history and has the same naive impulse to impart his sensations. It is still too much to believe that he could be entirely ignorant of what happened during those 20 years of strictest detachment from world affairs, quote unquote. You could as easily suppose he had missed the Pacific. During those 20 years, an event took place which stands unique and alone in the waste behind us, like a shaft of light, now forgotten. Immediately after the First World War, a new and ruinous armament race began. Even President Wilson, bitterly disillusioned, was for an American Navy to be incomparably the most powerful in the world. Nevertheless, we did believe in disarmament and preached it earnestly, only to receive back the echo of our own words. The armament race continued. Then one day, the American government invited the principal naval powers to a Washington conference. And when they were assembled, there was the Secretary of State said, "The United States is forging the longest sword of all. No matter how much longer you make yours, we can make a longer one still. Yet we do not want it. When we talk of disarmament, we mean it. To prove to you that we mean it, we now offer to break our sword to the exact length of the next longest sword in the world on condition that we stop this mad armament race. Do you accept?" The nation that was saying this, the one that was offering to limit its weapons power, was the richest in the world, possessing absolute industrial supremacy. Such a thing had never happened before. The delegates were stunned. However, they signed the famous 553 Arms Limitation Treaty. They signed also the famous Nine Power Pact, which was to keep the peace in the Pacific, to maintain the American principle of open door in Asia, and to guarantee the independence and territorial integrity of China. While we were sinking our ships, the other parties were sinking the spirit of the treaty. It had limited the number of capital ships only. They began to build unforbidden ships of new designs, and the race was on again, except that we hopefully continued to believe in disarmament and waited too long, with the result that the American Navy fell to third place. During those 20 years, the American government persuaded the whole world in solemn writing to renounce war as an instrument of foreign policy. That was the Kellogg-Briand Pact, so called because Briand had first suggested such a treaty between France and the United States only, whereas Mr. Kellogg, the Secretary of State, conceived the idea of making it worldwide. During those 20 years, we poured billions into Europe to finance reconstruction, to build new works, to restore her trade and credit, direct loans to France, Italy, Poland, and the Balkan countries, besides enormous loans to Germany, which enabled her to pay all the reparations she ever did pay to Great Britain and France. And we did this while Great Britain at the same time was leading a movement to repudiate her own and all Allied war debts to the United States Treasury. All of those billions we lost. During those 20 years, Americans sat everywhere in Europe as advisors and administrators. An American administered the Reparations Commission in Berlin. An American was head at the Bank for International Settlements in Basel. The Dawes Plan was American. The Young Plan was American. During the 20 years, the American government was untiring in its efforts to persuade the world to disarm in land and on sea. The Washington Naval Conference was in the time of Harding. The Universal Pact renouncing war as an instrument of foreign policy was at the time of Coolidge. One of Hoover's proposals was to abolish all weapons of aggression. At this, the world scoffed. How could weapons of aggression be distinguished? All of that happened in the 20 years defined by Mr. Wilkie as an era of strictest detachment from world affairs. We did not join the League of Nations. For this, Mr. Wilkie does not blame the people. He cannot, of course, blame the people for anything. They were betrayed, he says, by leaders without convictions who were thinking of group vote catching and partisan advantage. How strange. Much stranger, really, than the discovery that continents and oceans are all in one world when you see it from an airplane. The people wanted to join the League of Nations, but their conscienceless leaders defeated that wish in order to catch their votes. Neither in Mr. Wilkie's writing of the guilt theme, nor in any other will you find that Europe may have been to blame for the fact that the United States at last declined to adhere to the League of Nations. It is probably true that the American people did at first intend to join. Then they changed their minds. Why they did that may be debated at any length, but certainly one reason was disillusionment that took place in the time that elapsed between President Wilson's return with the document and the vote of the Senate on ratification. In that interval of time, Mr. Wilson had angrily rejected the British scheme for all-round cancellation of war debts at the sole expense of the United States. He rejected it on the ground that it meant charging German reparations to us. Thus, we were already cast for the role of Shylock, whether we joined the League or not.
Oh my gosh, it's the United Nations.
Yes. In that interval of time, it became painfully evident that Europe was Europe and that European intentions toward the United States had not changed since Canning, who who, having accepted the Monroe Doctrine in place of the Anglo-American alliance he wanted, made this curious boast: "I have called the New World into existence to redress the bounds of the old." Mr. Churchill supported the scheme that Mr. Wilson denounced, the European scheme to make America pay German war reparations. He was saying then what he recently said again: "I am, after all, a European." Now, where in all that history is the Chinese Wall, the broken shell, the Wallace Cave? And where is the meaning of isolationism? If you say of this history that its intense character has been nationalistic, consistently so from the beginning now, that is true. Therefore, the word in place of isolationism that would make sense is nationalism. Why is the right word avoided? The explanation must be the wrong one. The explanation must be that the wrong one, or what it is intended to do, is the perfect political word. Since isolationism cannot be defined, those who attack it are not obliged to define themselves. What are they? Anti-isolationists? But if you cannot say what isolationism is, neither can you say what anti-isolationism is, whereas nationalism, being definite, has a positive antithesis. One who attacks nationalism is an internationalist. The use of obscurity created by the false word is to conceal something. The thing to be concealed is the identity of what is speaking. Internationalism is speaking. It has a right to speak, as itself and for itself. But that right entails a moral obligation to say what it means and use true words. If one says, "I hold with Mr. Justice Roberts that for the sake of world peace we must be willing to surrender our national sovereignty," or as the federal unionist says, "I would be a citizen of the world first and secondly an American citizen," you know what that means. You know where one stands. But that is concealed in the obscurities, speaks warily. There is something it cannot say. Not yet. This is notably true of Mr. Wilkie's book. He says of those 20 years, we shut ourselves away from world trade by excessive tariff barriers. Sumner Welles, the Undersecretary of State, in his Blueprint for Peace says, after the last war, when other countries were looking to us for help in their stupendous task of economic reconstruction, the United States struck heavy blows at their war-weakened, debt-burdened structures. Our high tariff policy reached out to virtually every corner of the earth and brought poverty and despair to innumerable communities. The vice president says that by high tariffs after the last war, we sowed the wind and could not avoid reaping the whirlwind. You might be tempted to skip all this, pausing only to wonder a little that into a mighty discourse on the world to come, they should have introduced a bit of the old debate entitled protectionism versus free trade. But that is not what it is. This is not the old debate. It is the international point of view. They do not go all the way. They are too careful. Mr. Wilkie says that, of course, if all tariff barriers were cast down at once, there would be trouble. Nevertheless, what they mean saying it so guardedly is that we shall make our tariff laws hereafter not in the benefit of ourselves alone, but with international welfare in view, not as hitherto to protect the American standard of living only, but with the thought in mind that we are under a moral obligation to lift other people's standards too. The shoemaker in New England shall share his job with the shoemaker in Czechoslovakia, not in order that the shoe may be cheaper here, as the old argument was, but in order that the shoemaker in Czechoslovakia may be able to sell shoes in the American market. For unless he cannot do that, he cannot raise his standard of living. Formerly, says Mr. Wallace, the high tariff prevented the exchange of surplus for goods, other people's goods, he means, and so we exchanged our surplus for bonds of very doubtful value. But what shall we do with our still greater surplus at the end of this war? We can be decently human, he says, and really hard-hearted if we exchange our post-war surplus for goods, for peace, and for improving the standard of living of so-called backward people. Goods as far as goods go. After that, what? So many dollars worth of goods for so many dollars worth of peace? Peace, no doubt, would be a bargain at any price in goods, yet how shall peace be priced in goods? Anyhow, how shall it be, as Mr. Wallace says, the greatest adventure in sharing? He says, bread cast upon the waters does return. And Mr. Wilkie says, to raise the standard of living of any man anywhere in the world is to raise the standard of living by some slight degree of every man everywhere. If that is true, and it probably is, then it follows that by raising the standard of living here to the highest plane of all, we have at the same time been improving other people's standards everywhere. But we are not thinking of that. We were thinking of ourselves, and that was selfish. It is not yet inevitable that we shall have to buy the peace of the world with our standard of living, nor is it so resolved in the American mind. A terrific struggle for decision is bound to take place. When it comes, the characters will be revealed both to one another and to themselves, and many, no doubt, will change sides, seeing clearly for the first time where they were going. The isolationist will be an image, cast aside and forgotten. The bitter conflict at last must be one between the nationalist and the internationalist. And the longer this painful fact is concealed in a field of engineered emotion, the worse it will be. Nationalism is an American characteristic, is now powerfully, perhaps dangerously repressed. This is owing partly to intimidation and partly to censorship, but even more to self-imposed limitations upon the freedom of speech. From the feeling every patriotic person has that for the duration of this war and for the sake of unity among the Allied nations, there are many things one ought not to say out loud. Thus, internationalism was released to pursue its own logic, offensive over every wide and undefended spaces behind a screen of sanctioned propaganda. Its most effective propaganda is aimed unerringly at the singular weakness in the national character. Deep in the American heart lies a longing for the heroic errand, the errand of the plumed knight, clothed in armor of right, bearing the sword of justice, going forth to perform feats of crusade, rescue, and deliverance, at any sacrifice whatever. But we are not like that, in fact. But we love the fantasy, and sometimes indulge in it to the point of ecstasy. Just in time, we remember that we do not live in this world. If we ever had forgotten that, there would be nothing here now to lend lease away. So it may turn out.
That's funny.
Yep. So it may turn out that at last, that apparent success of the International Evangel is somewhat deceptive. At least the internationalist cannot be sure, and moreover, he has trouble of another kind. American nationalism may, for the time being, be repressed. It may continue to be successfully repressed to the end of the war. All elsewhere in the world, however, nationalism is rising, becoming more and more vocal, powerful, and assertive, even in Russia. If this continues, and there is no sign that it will not, an astonishing sequel may begin to appear. The proposed great American adventure in a worldwide sharing may assume a solitary aspect. Internationalism may at last become isolated in America.
Oh, that was a long one.
And all of it happened.
Much better. I prefer the shorter articles.
I think that one, though, was my favorite just because it, for a few reasons, actually. Number one, he deals away with this slur of isolationist that no one actually believes in, nor was it actually accurate. And he reframes it, I think, very skillfully into something that we could get along with. The other thing that I think is very important to look at is this idea of America establishing the peace. You can hear that from many people currently today, that it's America's job to keep world peace and that it's good for us and the world. But the entire time that Garet Garrett is describing this idea here, the Pax Americana, it's in a very negative light, almost completely negative. So I think that might have been the most important article that we read from this.
He, of course,
Indeed.
also mentions the League of Nations here, the precursor to the United Nations, which we hate.
And which was the least of it. I mean, he goes through the whole litany, but for historical context, the Washington Naval Treaty was a treaty whereby all of the nations of the world, the major navies, came together and agreed to limit their fleet sizes to a defined relationship of 553. The U.S. got 5 ships. For every 5 ships Britain got, for every 3 ships Japan got, I think Italy and France got 2. But it was codifying the balance of power so that we wouldn't have an arms race. The Dawes Plan, the Young Plan, these were massive funnelings of American money into Europe to rebuild Europe, for which, in gratitude, they welched on their war debts and asked us to pay Germany's war debts too into the bargain. So it's a litany of European abuse of America after the war, which is what caused us not to join the League of Nations. And so this accusation that we were shut away from the world for 20 years following the First World War is just a lie. It's an absolute lie. We were very engaged. We were engaged at great expense to ourselves and to very little good.
Not only is it a lie, but this is what the non-nationalism or the anti-isolationism looks like.
Yes.
You can't. It sounds better to just bash the isolationists or the nationalists, and then people will implicitly assume that you must be a much more common sense, pragmatic, strategic thinker than the ideologically monomaniacal isolationist or the nationalist. But
Ryan, what could be more pragmatic and strategic than all nations pinky swearing to renounce war?
Yeah, pinky swearing to renounce war while we pay the entirety of Europe to rebuild itself at basically no cost. Like if you were to go out and advocate at the point in time, contra to the isolationists, so-called, that America really needs to just throw billions and billions of dollars at Europe. We need to be responsible for reconstructing Europe. We need to be responsible for the territorial integrity of China. We need to be responsible for other nations not declaring war on each other anymore. That would sound absolutely insane. It very nearly sounds like the practical appearance of a neocon foreign policy. This idea
Ryan,
that America is
picture, if you will, a rules-based order.
Yeah, I mean, we could literally write the rules down and I'll sign it. We promise that we will not build more boats that are meant for killing people.
Well, and of course, that just led to a weird arms race. I'm sure our man Clausington knows quite a bit about this, but the naval treaty, of course, just gets skirted by developing these strange classes of ships that fit within the guidelines laid out. It doesn't really affect an actual arms limitation, just a strange transformation in the arms.
Right, but the point that I'm trying to get at here is that this is all fanciful nonsense. For as calculative and strategic the people in favor of this more internationalist order present themselves purely because they bash the other side. This
Ryan,
is actually
stop trying to get
advocate.
us back on point. I want to talk about the Mogami-class heavy cruiser.
So, the reason that I really wanted to point this out in this article is for 2 reasons. First is sort of just the conclusion of the point that I've been beating to death now. If anyone tries to sell you on an American empire, world peace at the cost of America, America is the policeman of whatever part of the world you want it to be, this is what it looks like as the interwar period. We end up paying for it, and we try in vain to establish this web of perpetual peace, which would be, I don't know, the 50th perpetual peace of the world declared at that point. The second thing that I really wanted to point out in this article is that the nationalism that Garet Garrett predicts would come to a resurgence really has not succeeded.
No.
The internationalists, the Wilkie brand of the GOP, and of course the New Dealers and the Democratic Party have entirely won the last century. And only in this century are you starting to see the beginning of any sort of pushback. So throughout this series, or throughout the course of this podcast, American Spirits, we've been very positive and constructive about American history. And if you're wondering where the time is that you should start being critical and really disliking where things have gone, this is indisputably that point.
Indeed. I think
American nationalism is dead at this point.
Yeah, I think it would be very worth doing a show just on the 1940 Republican Convention and who Wendell Willkie was and what went down there.
Yeah, that would be it would be good near into the future to go in, not even just the 40s, but also the Eisenhower campaign and who he
Mhm.
ended up displacing as the candidate. Um,
Yep.
it's really it sounds hyperbolic, but American nationalism really did not recover from the New Deal and the World War II administrations.
It's
Until now.
it's also worth pointing out the one of the understated criticisms of Woodrow Wilson here. Woodrow Wilson is a common punching bag on the right for getting us involved in World War One, which is valid, or establishing the League of Nations. The main criticism actually that I rarely see made, which is actually my primary reason for criticizing Wilson, is his naivete in believing that the Europeans were honest actors who would deal with him and America and each other in a fair way that revolved around a fair peace and justice and clemency. So Wilson was a fool, not for his ideals, but for believing that the Europeans were honest actors.
Which litany of why they weren't has just been laid out for us by Mr. Garrett.
Exactly. Well, with that, shall we get to the super chats?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, got a number of them all the way up at the top.
Charlie, I consent to these super chats.
Okay, good. We have Shastley for 99 cents. He sends us a super sticker rainbow, or she. I have no idea. Shastley. Dawn Browning, of course, sends us a little that might be a fox dressed as a samurai waving a #1 flag. Never seen that one before. 20 Australian dollars. Thank you for your contribution as usual, helping fund the OGC. Of course, we got Yiz's for $2, mentioned earlier in context about eating the ham in Tennessee. The fried ham specifically. Polly B619 for $20. Thank you very much for that. I don't think we've seen super chats from this account before. However subversive and exploitive World War I and II propaganda aimed solely at embroiling us in bankers' wars and foreign entanglements was, it strikes you that Manifest Destiny was a most convenient natural manure for it.
Well, yes, but Manifest Destiny itself is underlined by that very weakness of the American character that Garrett points to in this article, which is that longing to be a crusader. We love to indulge in this fantasy that we are going out into the world to slay monsters, and it is only when the costs come due that we remember that actually this is a retarded idea.
Well, and it's also worth pointing out a few differences as well. The people that were talking about Manifest Destiny, at least when it was expressed in policy, noted that we only wanted the uninhabited and underdeveloped parts of the places next to us. There were a few, and there were some of the most popular newspaper editors saying that we should just push all the way into China and become our own empire, but that was not the popular position. The popular position was always we want to. It's our destiny to push to the Pacific. That's what we will develop, and that's what Providence has given to us. It would be foolish to ask for more.
The destiny which was manifest to the people pursuing it was particular. It wasn't this open-ended drive to expand into infinity. We had a geographical boundary at which we were aimed, and that was the destiny which was manifest for the United States to fill.
And was manifested.
Yep.
And in fact, if you look after especially the Mexican-American War and then a few purchases afterwards, it would take decades until a completely new generation that did not believe in Manifest Destiny, but in something different, this idea of a new imperialism for America, to actually push us into the Pacific, into the Caribbean, and into these other places where we wouldn't populate those places with Americans. We would just rule them as if we were better Europeans and throw our money and manpower there. So there's like a patterns argument. You can see that expansion started with Manifest Destiny and continued, but the people doing it and the failed attempts as well kind of tell the different story, that Manifest Destiny stopped at the Pacific, and after that you get a whole bunch of very strange justifications that don't involve us actually settling in the places that we go to.
Mhm.
All right, and checking Entropy, we have one more from Level Coast for $5, who says, I am writing to express my interest in joining and supporting the OGC as a person of color and would like to know what pathways are available for individual involvement and how I can best support your community. Well, best way to get in touch is to email your local chapter. If you have one, you could check on the website whether or not there's a chapter, in your state, in your area, and they usually have contact info on their page for how you can email them. So that would be how you can get involved. And that's it. We have it's all the super chats. So thank you everyone for super chatting. Hopefully this was an informative stream. And are we looking at H.L. Mencken next week? Is that the plan?
Yes, we will have multiple articles. I cannot remember the name for the book. It is a Greek-based.
Brian is being taken away.
Sorry, hold on. Yeah, I can never remember the name for the book. It is a Greek-based word for like one's best selected writings that one compiles of one's own. A Mencken Chrestomathy. This is not a word that I was familiar with. This is something that I learned through Mencken. Basically,
Speak to me.
Mencken collected what he thought was his best writings in short form before on his own. So this is not posthumous or anything. We're going to be going through selected articles of that. And if you're wondering why on earth would we be going through H.L. Mencken, other than the fact that he's fun to read and genuinely hilarious, the answer is because the spirit that H.L. Mencken has, this idea of no attachment to institutions, this idea that things do need to be burnt down before they can be made better, is something that is increasingly lacking in a supposedly, people would usually call themselves radicals or somewhere far. They would not call themselves moderates, the online space to the right.
Okay, so you can look forward to that next week on episode 25. So thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you next week.